Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the podcast slash YouTube channel where I, your host, Carolyn Hines, film culture critic and journalist, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today, I'm very happy to be joined by my friend, fellow film culture critic and journalist, Candice Frederick, to talk about Hollywood, the Oscars 2025, and everything that has been happening. We're, of course, going to talk about the films that have been nominated for the Oscars this year, those that have not been nominated, but we're also going to talk about the changing culture in Hollywood. And I think how social media has impacted the way Hollywood changes, the way it does films, promote films, even screen films, and how that has affected us ourselves as critics and journalists in the industry. But first of all, thank you so much, Candice. Yay!
Thank you for having me. Always fun to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be so much fun because like we have our last conversation was we talked about
The substance.
the substance, like my sorry, like you guys know I have like memory issues, like so forgive me. But yeah, it was The Substance by Coralie Farge, and we had actually talked about how horror films and films in this genre and vein aren't typically nominated for like the main category of films at the Oscars. And would you know it, it actually did get nominated for an award this year. It got nominated for in two main categories. It got nominated for best makeup and also for best film, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, best film, best directing, best actor, best makeup, best screenplay. Wow, incredible.
Yeah, like it got nominated. I mean, you're going through on the official Oscars website. So it got nominated for best actress in a lead role for Demi Moore, which I think it very much deserved. I think it deserved for best editing too, but it didn't. And best makeup and hairstyling for Pierre Olivier Persin, Stephanie Guyon, and Marianne Scarcelli. So I'm kind of happy that it got nominated for the Oscars. But the reason I started talking about The Substance is because, as I said, like films of this genre and in this style aren't normally nominated for Oscars, and it also means that Coralie is the only female director nominated with a film this year. So I wanted to talk about that. So let's talk about the films that we liked that have been nominated this year. So for you, Candice, apart from The Substance, what other films that were nominated for you this year that you were said, what? It does deserve recognition.
Definitely The Substance. I'm very here for that. The Brutalist, Nosferatu, um, Conclave. I'm a big fan of Conclave. Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which is it's a documentary, and it's just a superb documentary about the jazz resistance and how that correlates with uh, the resistance and uprising in the Congo over the last. I think it goes back to like it kind of centralizes the story in like the 60s and 70s, I want to say. But that definitely, those kind of instantly come to mind. I'm like looking over the list myself and I'm trying to figure out like what else that I really like. I'm Still Here, I think Fernando Torres's performance is actually the best part of that movie. I think the movie is fine, and I'm fine with seeing it here nominated as a film. It's like overall, but I think it's her performance that really sets that film, um, like gives that film the edge. Because otherwise, I'm not sure if we would really be talking about that film like that, like we are. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, those are a few. I'm trying to think. But yeah, those are the ones that come to mind of the films I think that are actually really worthy and have received a few different nominations.
Yeah, I'm with you. I haven't seen I'm Still Here. I was gonna watch it and I was actually gonna do a review for it, but I'll be completely honest, I didn't do it because I found out that the lead actress did blackface. And I'm like, she did blackface as a grown adult. And I was thinking, oh, like, we always say separate the art from the artist. But for me, like, this is something that's so common and it's just like that, and it's so unnecessary. I was just thinking because if I had watched the film before I knew that, I think I would have a different idea of it. But watching the film after I found out about that would have made it different because I think for me, knowing me, I would have been just picturing her in blackface watching the film, but I know she has given a stunning performance. And I've heard someone else say the same thing, where she is what makes the film, where without her, like, the film wouldn't be in as much discussions with regards to film, with regards to awards, as it is without her performance. And of course, like, Substance was one of my best films from 2024, as was Conclave. Like, Conclave, I love Conclave because it's a bunch of gossipy churchmen, like backstabbing each other. And I was like, yes, give me the gossipy man, because that's like coming from growing up in the church. That's how it is. Like, old people in the church gossip. Like, they'll sit down in their little enclaves, literally chatting away, gossiping about who's doing what, who's trying to get the position of head deaconess. Like what's going on between the pastor and the deacons, and like all of the subterfuge and the politics within the church. But then seeing that brought, like, kind of expanded on in the biggest church in the world, which is the Catholic Church, which is, like, when it comes to the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church is very much as about politics as it is about religion. So
also, that film really does a really good job of really dismantling this idea that these mortals are anything more than mortals. Like, they are petty bitches. You know what I mean? And so the way in which we exalt them as something other than what they are is something that this film is, I think, directly engaging and confronting.
No, it's true, because it's very much about humanizing these men vying to be Pope, the most holy of the holy, and they look at them as God's messenger directly on earth. And this film is very much like, nah, these are just regular men who are just as trifling as the person you're standing next to on the street, And it shows, like, their motivations are that has nothing to do with a sanctified calling. It's about choosing who's going to benefit you,
It's about power. It's really about power and influence, and I think that's really self-motivated.
Yeah, and I think that's actually tied into one of my other favorite films from last year, which kind of got ruined when I found out it has AI. I will talk about AI as well, but that was The Brutalist, because The Brutalist is also talking about how men use each other, and how men, like, use power to get what they want, But I think The Brutalist does it in a different way, because it talks about religion, because it does talk about the Jewish Holocaust and how Hungarians were also targeted and massacred during the Holocaust and World War II. But it talks about how men, capitalists, brutalize each other in a way to show dominance, but also brutalizes the environment to show dominance, and men destroy the world and destroy each other to build monuments to their own genius. And I kind of see Conclave as kind of the same way. Conclave is about these men tearing each other down to push themselves up higher in a higher position of power and dominance.
The Brutalist, I really think, is a staggering piece of work. I think it's way too long, but I do think that I watched it in a couple of days, so I didn't watch it all in one theater. I don't know how I would feel if I were to watch it all in one sitting, but regardless, I think there's so much to really appreciate about that movie. I mean, the performances are so good. And the fact that, I watched it at home, so I could have just turned it off. But I was really invested in the story. I was really invested in where this was going. And I had no idea where this was going. But I thought it was extremely difficult material to bring to fruition. And it just seemed so gargantuan in so many ways, but also really worthy.
Yeah, it's the film is long. I think it's about just 3 hours long. And what I did appreciate
3.5 hours. It's 3.5 hours long.
Yes, right. It is 3.5 hours. Yes, because it had an intermission, which I did appreciate. And I did watch it in one day. I challenged myself. I watched it in one day, and I did appreciate that it had an intermission. But yeah, I do the material for the film, like, so much is covered in it, and just the scope of it, just not only a timeline, but just in the scope of the story, how it's talking about building this monument, and and how building monuments can take so much time and take so much out of you physically, mentally, emotionally, and I think also spiritually. And I think again the other film that we talked about, The Substance, talks about that. As we discussed in our previous discussion about The Substance, where we talked about how Hollywood, celebrities, stardom, fandom takes so much out of the people that is within the system. How it takes so much out of the character that Demi Moore plays. So I kind of all see all of these, most of these films kind of having like a similar theme, where it's talking about just like, it's capitalism. It's also about power dynamics, like becoming a bigger figure socially and politically than the person itself, about having this identity that's bigger than you. And Brutalist is about that, I think, as well. The architect, the architect is a man, but the thing that he builds is bigger than him, and that encapsulates who he is as an identity. And Hollywood is kind of like that. Hollywood is about building up human beings into something bigger and grander and worthy of worshiping and looking at, idolizing.
And only to tear them down almost immediately. So it's very counterproductive.
Only to not only tear them down and discard them, but also to like distort, the perception of everything about it and around the people, not only the people, but the system, and even us, the audience, that we get manipulated and gaslit by the industry itself.
And we also are very, very complicit. We're not powerless. And so I think that we as viewers make a lot of just terrible decisions in terms of who we exalt, who we excuse, like the people that we cancel versus not cancel, and how that's not always like our motivations of that is usually self motivations, does not really have anything to do with the actual person itself or really remedying the actual issue. We have a really warped, strange relationship with celebrity, and it's not really consistent, and it's very holier than thou that actually reveals our own mortality, that reveals our own, like, really it reveals more about our own flaws than who we are either exalting or tearing down.
Yeah, and as you said, that kind of ties, and it kind of made me just think of like how I judge, as I said, like the performers and their art. Like, obviously we always separate the artist from the art, but sometimes for me that's impossible just because that's the kind of person I am. And as we were talking, I was thinking about how I love The Brutalist, like as I said, one of my favorite films from last year. But then when I legit maybe forgot that Adrian Brody was in The Pianist, which is a film directed by Roman Polanski. And I had told myself,
very good performance.
And it was he won the Oscar for it, won the Oscar for it. But I remember, but like years ago, I had told myself I would never watch a Roman Polanski film because of like his history, his background, not only as an assaulter, but the way he abuses women and everything. And I remember I legit did forget that Adrian Brody was in that film. But then someone reminded me, I was like, but wait, and then I had to sit and really think with myself. I'm like, I had to sit and think, does this change the way I perceive his performance in the film? In
Brutalist?
Yeah, in The Brutalist.
Wow.
And I have to really sit and think, does that, and the thing is what made me really have to sit and think about that is because of what happens to his character in the film. With what Guy Pearce's character did to him in the film. And I kind of thought about how for actors, where we talk about separating the artist from the art, sometimes I think we also forget like how actors are really performing a character, and we have to learn to separate the artist from the actual character they're playing. Because I was thinking, how do you go from working with someone like Roman Polanski to then starring in a film about a man who gets sexually assaulted?
Yeah, we also have to really consider the fact that the actors have nothing to do with the director's personal lives and decisions. And they're, in both instances, I think he's playing fictional characters. Also, who knows what Adrian Brody knew of Roman Polanski, other than the fact that he's a good director, because he is a good director, before he signed on for The Pianist. So
that was one of his first films. Wasn't that his first major role in The Pianist? I think it was, right?
It might be.
He was relatively unknown before that.
Yeah, was relatively unknown. And
Yes.
so, yeah, I mean, that's just a lot to, I don't really agree with this like guilty by association thing that seems to be rampant in how we talk about celebrity and accountability. And I mean, I think there's one thing to say, however you feel about Roman Polanski as a person or what has been written about him as a person. I'm assuming a lot of us don't actually know him personally, but have read a lot of really unsavory things about him, which I understand why people feel a kind of way about those things that they've read about this person. But this whole guilty by association thing is really odd to me because it it seems really counterproductive and also really like, okay, what are we actually talking about? We're not even talking about Polanski anymore. We're just talking about people who he knows and like who's in his orbit and who have maybe nothing to do with decisions that he's made or not made.
Yeah, no, I get and I get that, and because then the other thing with the brutalist, because this is I guess we're kind of like and it is tying into like the nominations themselves is and how the industry is changing is like the other thing that made me really have to ponder about how I feel about the brutalist is finding out that AI was used in the process of the film because it not only was like they said a little bit of it was used in processing the dialogue because they wanted perfect diction and pronunciation when Adrian's character spoke in Hungarian. But the thing that really did bother me, not even necessarily that, was that they used it to render drawings of in the film, you know, and I to me that was contradictory because I'm like the film is very much I think also about the environment and it's talking about again men destroying the environment to build monuments themselves and also artists, creatives, architects, builders being exploited by capitalists to render the creations for the sake of capitalism, you know, like exploiting their work for the benefit of the capitalists. And when I found out that they used AI in the film for that, it was like that's so contradictory because there's actual architects that build the sets on your film. Why couldn't they do the sketches for the film? You know, I thought that was like, but I was like, how does it make sense to use AI when you actually have to use actual architects and set builders on the film who could have and should have drawn the pieces that we saw? You know, because the first reference I thought of was in Titanic. You know, there's that famous scene where Jack is sketching
I've
the
never
body.
seen the Titanic.
What?
Yeah, but I feel like I've seen it because people have told me pretty much every single thing about it, so I know exactly what you're gonna say.
Yeah, there's a scene where Jack, with Rose, and it's a very indelible scene in my head because Titanic was one of the very first. I think it was the very first film I saw in the cinema by myself. But like, she's lying down in this carriage that's in the hold of the ship, and like they're having this steamy, sexy moment. And she's like, "Paint me like one of your French girls," you know. They know like there's that line, but she's like lying down naked, and so he draws her. But and like it's a beautiful sketch of Kate Winslet who plays Rose. But the sketch that we see is that the hand that we see doing the sketching is actually James Cameron's hand. You know, like he drew the actual sketch on camera. So the film. So when I found that out about the Brutalist, I was like, but couldn't they have done that? You know, like use actual sketches by the actual creators on the film? And I'm just like, and I bring this up because like the thing in a lot of these films that is happening in because and you wrote a piece about it is about how AI is becoming normalized in film, and then it kind of makes you wonder. It made me. It had again. I had to question like, does it change the way I feel about the film? And it kind of does because one of the most beautiful parts about the film is when we see those sketches. You know, when we see where for me because it's where we talk where they're talking about the work that Laszlo's done. Because it happens at the end of the film, but it's talking about the work that Laszlo's done, you know, but this is what's left of him. All that's left of him are these buildings and these sketches, you know, because there's the scene with the daughter, she's doing this speech at this event for him. And while she's talking, we see the sketches for the first time in the film. And she's like, these are what's left of my father. These are my father's, this is my father's heart, you know, this is my father's loves and dream of architecture and all this stuff. And then you hear that, and then it's just like, oh wait, so these aren't even actually created by a human being.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the film is fantastic.
Yes.
But yeah, I remember a lot. I mean, as you said, I wrote this whole. Well, I wrote a piece that talked about how we talk about AI, and how it has become more um, accepted, or with like a lot more caveats than that there was before. And I use the brutalist as one example because of the way people have used it as a caveat. And I do agree to a certain extent that it's so minimally used in AI, and everybody and all the artists were also consenting to it. That it kind of flies in the face of what my biggest concerns about AI is: the non-consensual use of it, non-consensual use of artists' images and work and stuff like that. But again, it's just like we're all contradictory individuals, and I think that is what is so fascinating about this conversation. It's just like, okay, we accept it here, but don't accept it there, and where's the line, and why do we keep moving the line? Things like that. And at the end of the day, I still think again, the brutalist is great, but yeah, I also recognize that the issue of AI, which I don't think Brutalist really presents that issue, but I think the issue of AI is still a major concern. And I think we're only going to continue to get more instances like the Brutalist that make us really grapple with how much we're willing to accept until we're actually fully complicit in it. And I think that's what is worrisome about it.
Yeah, because for me, what I see is that this is one of the first steps of normalizing it for audiences. And when I say normalizing it for audiences with regards to the industry, is because the audience has so much control in how the industry operates. Like we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of those things is about how celebrity plays a part now, especially now, in how films are promoted, and in what films are made and why these films are made. And if the industry, the tech bros who are pushing AI more and more and more, can normalize AI to us in film, it will make it easier for them to exploit people within the industry with AI. Because one of the main sticking points of the strike in 2023 was AI. That was one of the main that's one of the main reasons they even had the strikes in Hollywood. It was because of AI, and like they were fighting for, it was like going on several months where they're like, we need protections against AI being used to exploit our work, steal our work, because the way how AI works is stealing. Like AI doesn't create anything original. It takes bits and pieces from different things to create this amalgamation of a quote unquote new creation. And if we the audience see a film getting nominated that has AI, then the industry can say, but look, it's been awarded, it's been recognized, there's nothing wrong with it, because the people who voted for it don't find a problem with it.
Well, I mean, Hollywood, the powers that be in Hollywood do find AI, like present that as an issue. I think um, artists who are, many of whom are in front of the camera, obviously feel very strongly against it. Well, largely speaking, again, some of them are also contradictory about, like, when they kind of speak out about it, then they kind of, you know, have their caveats too. They're all really contradicting themselves at this point. Um, Writers obviously were extremely vocal about it. Um, I don't know how you get around using AI in place of actual writers. I'm sure they're doing it, but it's just such a wild thing. But yeah, I mean, I think general audiences honestly don't care. I mean, AI has been used in movies for decades. It's because it's become kind of a derogatory term now, like, or is being said, is used derogatorily. I think that people are actually really almost like reacting to it in a knee jerky fashion more than they ever did before, because AI is not new and the use of AI is not new. It's actually was more exploitative before than it is now. But because people are a lot more vocal about it now. But I mean, it's still not a foolproof plan, and AI is it can be very it can be very sophisticated, but not intelligent at all, which is kind of the opposite of what it talks about. But this is like it's not intelligent, and so it meaning, and I say that meaning that it could do a lot of things, but also the more it does new and more sophisticated things, the more problems that will arise because of that. Because one problem will be, eradicated, then another one will pop up because now it can do this other thing. It's just
Yeah.
all. It's not. It's pretty threatening, but I also just don't think the brutalist particularly falls into that concern. But again, there is a concern about AI in general.
Yeah, it is because I just said like AI has been used in film for years and stuff because there's AI and then there's Gen AI, which is my fault. I should have clarified like Gen AI. But the thing is like we're Gen AI is the one that's like really problematic because of how destructive it is, not only environmentally but how exploitative it is. Like straight up stealing. Or this like there was an article that came out late last year where someone did a report and they were like at least 11,000 scripts. I think they said somewhere around that number. Scripts of TV shows and films have been basically stolen and used for generating screenplays and scripts and and like then there's also this trend on you're seeing it on Twitter, but you see on YouTube and all these people who say like AI, we're making better films than what Hollywood is making using generative AI. And when you see it, like you can tell what films they're stealing the images from, and like they're like not telling stories, they're stealing work. But then there's also just the complete lack of soul in these images, and then of course there's, as I said, the environmental impact, like how they just like the cooling plants just completely drain water from the ground, and like there's all these things. And then you see a company like Marvel posting a picture using AI as mere promotional material for a film. And then again, that's what I was saying, like how they're like normalizing it bit by bit. And then it just makes you dread where the industry is going, and it makes you dread how much of what we see as film and TV is going to change because of this, because it's not only, to me, not only just Gen AI itself that's a problem. It's just like how art itself is being devalued, how the creative process, the human mind and our ability to create magic from nothing. I see filmmaking as magic, where you're taking an idea from inside your head, writing a story on it, and then building a whole world around this thing that you work. And I feel like, and then you looking at the films, some of the films that have been nominated, I'm seeing it happen, Like, again, so many people aren't going to agree with me, but one of the films, for instance, would be, there's Amelia Perez, but one of the other films, I see a fundamental problem with regards to that, like, if you look at just writing itself, Anora, I think the film is good.
You said that you think the film is what?
I don't think the film is good, Anora.
Oh yeah, I think we talked about this online a bit. I am on the opposite end of this. I really do like the film quite a bit, but yeah, I know people have other issues with it, which I think are valid.
Yeah, I liked it. I really liked it when I saw it, but then the more I sat with it, and then I was listening to some sex workers who saw it and they gave their perspective, and I was thinking, you know what? I see where they're coming from,
Yeah.
But it's not only that, but then there's also films like Amelia Perez, where like you have the lead actress is just like, whoo, straight up horrendously racist. But then the director himself is racist, because not only has he shown vocal support for her, but he's made multiple statements online and in interviews where he like says things where he disparages Mexicans and Mexico, the country the film is setting, and then says that Spanish, meaning the Spanish spoken in Mexico, not the actual Spanish spoken in Spain, is a language of poor people in third world countries, and it's a language of uneducated people. And
I also want to add that the Emilia Perez is also not a great not a great movie. On top of that, I mean, that's the conversation that I feel like has gotten lost in it. And I know
no, I want us to talk about that. Yeah.
I know there's a lot to suss out of the actual people who made the film, who helped make the film. Carlos Sofia Gaston, Juan. I'm sorry, not his name is not Juan. I'm sorry. The director.
You mean the director?
Yeah.
Oh,
Cam,
let me look at his. Let me look at
who's
his
a
name.
who's a who's a white French cisgender director.
Jacques Audat.
Yes, sorry. Yes, forgive me. Yeah, I mean, the if you watch the film, when I first watched the film, I thought it was fantastic, and I still have some remnants of that for it. But kind of like when you were talking about talking to sex workers about Honora, for me, it was talking to Mexican people and trans people about Emilia Perez. And so, I mean, obviously not all of them feel negatively about the film, but a good amount of them do. And, the comments that Jacques um, has made really can be seen in the way in which the film, which he adapted, he wrote and adapted all on his own without having any actual consultants from the Mexican or trans communities, which I think is the first mistake he made. It shows a lot in the way in which the trajectory of the character, the title character played by Carlos Sofia Gascon. And so I'm like, all of this rolls into one for me. I'm just like, this is yucky, all of it. But if it was just like Carla Sofia Gascon, her old tweets being resurfaced, and her, whether or not you trust her apology or and that's on whoever it is on the opposite end. That's their prerogative to either do so or not. Same thing with Jacques, who actually, from what I understand, has not even acknowledged that he has said things in the past. To at least say, "Oh, I don't feel that way anymore," or, "Oh, it was taken out of or say something. I don't know, but even if it was just those two people, I mean, you can kind of really talk about the art on its own. But because the film reveals so much about who's making it, it all kind of starts to blend in for me, and it just all starts to smell kind of yucky.
Yeah, no, and I agree, because the thing is like, because the other thing that this is where as I said, there, when it comes to talking about separating the art from the artist, there's like, I think there's two things you can talk about where the art can operate separately from the artist, but then it's where the art can't operate separately from the artist, because what the artist believes and their ethics and their moralities bleeds into the stories and bleeds into the art, where you're like, I can't separate this, because like he's telling us exactly what he thinks of Mexican people, and what he thinks about Mexican culture, what he thinks about Mexico as a culture, as a country. So you're like, I can't separate the story from that, because he's telling us what is exactly what he thinks. As you said, like the first thing was like not having any Mexican consultants or trans consultants or Mexican trans consultants, and like people to talk about the culture, because one of the main parts of the film is he's talking about there's this a community of women who go looking for missing women and children, that been kidnapped by the cartels, and like that's such a big problem in Mexico. And there are these groups of women that have dedicated their lives to that, to speaking out against the cartels, to speaking out against the political corruption, and against the police force and all that. And like that's not explored well in the film, because like his own prejudices paints how he presents these communities. Like the character of Emilia Perez is based on an actual real life person who was responsible for disappearing many young Mexicans, like, and so a lot of people were like, if he had actually really cared, he would have been like, first of all, you wouldn't even be trying to make a character like that sympathetic in any way, because they're not sympathetic.
Well, I mean, I think there's no problem in humanizing the character at all. I have no issue with that. If you want to make if you want to, I was not aware that this was based on a true character because I thought that it was based on a book that was fiction. And then Jacques' adaptation kind of it was an adaptation, but it wasn't actually true to the source material because there were large changes that Jacques made in his own adaptation, for reasons that I don't understand. But I think that I think she doesn't have to be a vindicative character. She just doesn't. Like she also doesn't have to be somebody who's one-dimensionally terrible. I don't think that anybody's one-dimensionally terrible, but I do think that if you're gonna, present what is actually a femicide going on even still today in Mexico, then you do need to have the character reckon with that, even as she's fully realized as a woman. She still does need to reckon with that, and I don't think that having this foundation that she co-founded is the move for that. But and I also, what the biggest concerns that I think I read were from trans people who were just like, this is not actually honest to any trans experience in terms of the way in which she talked about herself. And I have talked to a number of people in the trans community. It's not a monolith. Everybody kind of has their own transition story, and it's not all pretty. It's not clean. Some of it kind of looks a little more similar to Emilia Perez in terms of just like kind of talking about yourself as two different genders, things like that, which I think a lot of people took issue with. But it's the way in which time works and the way in which like it was so, to hear them talk about it, to hear trans people talk about the film, it was just like, wow, this is actually ridiculous what's going on in this movie, because it doesn't, one of my issues with the way in which the film has been lauded is that it's been basically co-opted by this white French culture, and then co-opted once more from a white American culture, all cis. And you're moving so far away from the culture that is rooted in the story, in the film, and kind of presenting this as some type of like, we're moving forward, when in actuality I continue to hear that it's regressive.
Yeah, and you said something that I want us to talk about, because the thing with the Oscars, one of the reasons why I myself have pulled away from like covering the Oscars as a critic and a journalist is because I've become very, I wouldn't say disillusioned, but I've just become very more, I think not disillusioned is the right word, disillusioned with just Hollywood in general. And like, because again, I would say like my background coming from the Caribbean and living here as an immigrant in North America, very much I know shapes my perceptions of certain things. Like Hollywood in particular, when in the Caribbean, and this is for everywhere, where also outside of America, where I don't think Americans fully understand just how much Hollywood and American media paints the Oscars as the beyond the end all. As that if you don't succeed there, if you don't get the recognition of any American award, particularly Oscars, you're not worthy. Like you are not worthy of consideration or validation of any other thing. Like to get an Oscar is the pinnacle. And to me, like that's always been presented. And then as I start to learn more about the film industry globally, I realized like how not only absurd that is, but how damaging that is. because you got like the Blue Dragon Awards, you got like the Golden Dragon Awards in Asia. Like China has like they give awards for like people not only in Asia but all across the world. Like they give awards to people from for films presented in other countries. And like in South Korea, you have the Busan International Film Festival, which is one of the largest film festivals in the world, and they recognize films from like and shows from in countries that get, and I'll use Netflix as an example, that Netflix like takes, Netflix doesn't promote them or whatever, but they win awards in like places like South Korea. Like there's this Indian drama that won like 2 awards. The female lead won an award as best lead actress in a drama in Busan, and the show won an award for best drama. And like it's won other awards at other Asian award. I'm getting tongue tied, but other organizations, And then I was thinking, but then again, people only pay attention to the American shows that if you like, you know what I mean? For Netflix only promotes its own it only promotes the things that are popular with Americans.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, that same show could have been set up for an Emmy, because if they can nominate Squid Game, which is a South Korean project, why can't they set that same Indian show to be nominated for an Emmy? And I watched it. The actors give a fantastic performance, and I was just thinking, it's just like the reason is that show isn't going to get recognition in a North American to North American audiences is because it's been recognized by other places. Because conversely, Squid Games has not really won that many awards outside of North America. I think the biggest award they've gotten is for stunts, choreography. That was both at in South Korea as well as I think the one of the Chinese award ceremonies. They got an award for stunts.
Yeah.
But in North America, in North American media, you never guess that. You think it's the best thing ever. You think that is the only South Korean show being recognized with awards, when actually that's not true. It's other shows being recognized.
Yeah, I mean, I think also that North America, and particularly USA, is defaulted as the end all be all, and defaulted as the arbiter of art globally. And that's not just because of our own complicity as North Americans. It's globally. We collectively, globally, default to America, and for our own detriment, I think.
No, and I agree. So that's one of the things that when I think about it, it breaks my heart, because I always tell people, I always say, if you don't win an award at the Oscars, doesn't mean that your film isn't.
No, I mean most films
validated,
most good films don't get nominated. I mean, that has nothing to do with like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of really great films that do get nominated, and I don't want to take away from people who deserved it and won, because they should have, and that's great. They should be happy about that. But also it's not definitive in terms of like, these are the only great films that happened last year or whatever year it is. That's just not actual. That's not factual. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, the way in which people talk about the Oscars tends to be very definitive. Like, oh, well, it won an Oscar, so it must be good. I'm like, I would watch that yourself. It's not always a foolproof plan. And also, like, there's a lot of films that are snubbed, or just did not make it on on that coveted shortlist. That doesn't mean that they're not good. It just does that. There's a lot. I mean, politics are a big part of it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think politics played a huge role in Emilia Perez. I think politics played a huge role in Wicked getting so many nominations, because I think that they need like a young, popular crowd, and they want a bunch of like young people to watch the Oscars, and they're going to be watching for that reason. They're not going to be watching for The Brutalist. Most of them haven't seen that. So it's all very much a show, you know?
It is because, like, as I began to pay more attention to the industry and learn more about the industry and everything, that's when I really began to realize the Oscars a lot. The whole thing is mostly about politics. You know, like when we read interviews where people say, "Oh yeah, I voted, but I didn't even watch what I voted for." You know, I vote like when they say most of us don't even watch the films that are nominated. You know, we vote because our friends directed it. We vote because it's our studio. We vote because of the acquaintances that we have with regards to the production. You know, we vote because we know if this studio gets this many awards, it'll help. You know, it'll put more money into that studio. That a lot of it is politics. It's about friends. It's about who you know. It's about people doing self-serving things. And
Yeah.
you mentioned Amelia Paradise, but also Wicked. That's one of the other things. Like for Wicked, like got nominated in for Best Picture, and I'm like, when you look
Yeah.
at the films that is stacked up against, like again, like The Brutalist, you know, Conclave, like even The Substance, you know, like these kind of films, you're like, really?
That
Oh, how sweet.
they really wanted the young people to watch the ceremony. That's really what that is. Like they're trying
It
to
is.
get ratings and
It is because then you have like the fandoms, and this is again where I want us now to talk about how culture as it is now, social media as it is now, is influencing Hollywood. You know, I've talked about it briefly on like Twitter and stuff, where I talk about how like when it comes to attending events now, we see more TikTok people on the red carpet than actual film critics and journalists. You know, we see studios like using social media, like quote unquote social media language, because they're trying to pander to the fandoms. You know, we see it in the studios talking about changing stories and changing characters to appease fandoms. One of the biggest things of that is Star Wars. Like it's been like in pieces, you know, like in articles, like when people speak to the executives and stuff, they say, "Oh yeah, we had like test audiences, and the test audiences didn't like this particular thing, and the thing that we changed is usually has to do with something relating to a person, a character of color." You know, you know, where they're like, we're changing more progressive storylines because we want to appeal to a more conservative base, because the industry is veering right back into being more white, more, you know, more white, more conservative politically. And like we're seeing how that's changing and how social media is influencing the industry and the films that are getting highlighted, you know. So I wanted to talk a bit about that, about how Hollywood itself is being is changing, and it's not changing for the better. It's not, to me, it's not changing for the better. And how I to me, I look at the Oscars as like, I'll say Hollywood is a microcosm of society, and I think the Oscars itself is a small microcosm of that, because
Mhm.
what we see gets nominated is a reflection of what's happening within the industry microcosm itself.
Yeah. This rollback I've seen play out almost so swiftly. I mean, the new presidential administration is probably one of the most efficient, quick administrations I've seen in my lifetime. And I think that Hollywood is really buckling to that. I mean, you see some elements of resistance, but it's much quieter than it was before. And you're seeing that, you know, even you know, us talking about the way in which people's relationship with AI has shifted, but even just like, you know, I think challenging films are still happening every day. I just think that they're getting more and more pushed to the margins. They're getting less distribution, um, in favor of this sense of more conservative. I'm trying to think of another word for that, but just like more like I've seen a few different um, trailers and press. I've received a few different press releases from movies that have like a biblical subtext and or not even subtext, like overt text in like central text. I've seen more like Hallmarky type films that are not just on Hallmark, just like more that are going to theater, meaning like more inspiration, more like, let's put like these values first type of thing, and less about, even if we're centralizing a villain. And I have no issues with centralizing a villainous character, but they're not doing it in a way that is dimensional or challenging or engaging at all. And so, but we're seeing less villainous characters. We're seeing more like, daddy knows best type of characters, and like more like down home. Like the other day, or a couple weeks ago, actually, there was an announcement that they're bringing back Little House on the Prairie. I
Yes.
definitely watched a lot of Little House on the Prairie growing up. There is no way that should be coming back. But it's so indicative of the way, like, of what we are trying to prioritize in our art now. This sense of, again, it's like, down on the rant, daddy knows best, and I keep on saying daddy knows best, or father knows best, even
Father
though,
knows best, yeah.
yeah. But it's like, it's this sense of like, bringing the values of yesteryear into today's lens, but also being extremely intentional about its propaganda. And the films and TV show, and that, things like A Father Knows Best, or even like Little House on the Prairie. That's not to say that those films and TV shows weren't good. They were fine, and they were very indicative of the culture that they came into. But I think bringing them back is also a very deeply intentional move to be like, we want to bring a certain feeling back. We want to bring a certain value back. And it's not even it's not even the type of thing where it's just like, bring these values back. But it's more like, bring these values back and also get rid of all this other crap that we've been trying to, like, artists have been actively trying to challenge, or make like really complex characters that really have people sit with them, and like stories that people would have to then sit with. It's just more like, let's have more flattened, conservative, very deeply traditional propaganda art, and then for reasons that are more indicative of the administration than anything else. And I think what worries me more is that not enough people are really calling that out. It's like it's happening, and we were so vocal, like very recently we were so vocal, and then like it's all stopped. And I think that's really disgusting and cowardly.
It is. And that, yeah, I saw that press release about Little House on Prairie, and I had the same reaction. It was like, really? I'm like, okay, because like we've seen them for the last, like, so I have to keep in mind, we're in 2025. So I would say from around 2021, late 2020, we've seen a lot of reboots being made or being announced, especially reboots and of white stories, white films and shows. And I've noticed that they're all going further and further back in the past. There would be reboots of like first, and because some of them were reboots of films and shows that came out like only 2, 3, 4 years prior. And then they started to go like 10, 15, 20 years prior. Now they're going back a whole 50 years prior, and I can see like we're going to be getting back to the days of Gone with the Wind. Going far back as Gone with the Wind. And the reason why that is just going strictly from a culture perspective is like, as they go further back into the past with these stories, we're getting less progressive critical coverage of these same stories and films. Like for us as film critics, 2 Black women and journalists, we see what's happened, like I've pitched work and I haven't had work accepted. I know editors who were like women of color who got fired from their positions because a lot of their work was about centering or highlighting journalists of color, like people like you who got recently laid off at Huffington Post. So many people not only doing cultural criticism and cultural work, but I also saw one of the people that got fired from Huffington Post, this one who covers the environment, and culture and environment. And that's happening not only at Huffington Post, but at so many other outlets, especially the major trades. We've seen like smaller independent outlets where if we can't pitch to the big trades, we could pitch to like a smaller outlet to get a piece published, and there we can't because most of them are gone, or they don't have the budget. They don't have a budget to like take on a freelancer and like pay for us. And not that we were even as freelancers getting paid that much to begin with, but they have even less money now. And like we're seeing this trend as they go back to conservatism in the stories and in the narratives, and who makes these films. Again, mostly people of color, white people. People of color are not only being disenfranchised within the industry itself as creatives, as writers, directors, filmmakers, but like we're being disenfranchised and pushed out on the margins as of journalists, as people who see what's happening and want to write about it. So like we're getting pushed to the margins too. And when you have less people given opportunities to see the world as it is and write about it, it's so much more easier to influence people into seeing and believing what people want them to see in media. Like for instance, you see a Little House on the Prairie coming back, but if you don't have anyone to critique why a show like this is being brought back, you're not going to have anyone questioning the motives behind bringing it back. If you have people using Amelia Perez as an example, if you don't have any trans or Mexican critics getting the opportunity to write about these stories, you're not going to get people learning the opposite side of it, like learning how to consider this different perspective, and like for me, one of the things that I do, I try to highlight. One of the reasons I try to highlight independent filmmakers so much is it's so hard already in this industry, to be an independent story filmmaker, to write stories about people of color, to write stories about disabled people, to write stories about LGBTQ people and get them made, and it's going to become so much harder. I have this foreboding sense that even with the films that we have nominated this year, which are majority, again, as usual, overwhelmingly white, you're not really going to get a film, for instance, even with all of its problems, Amelia Perez is still a film about a trans woman.
I mean, if that's the baseline, that's great. Like, and that's, but there's still so much more. It's just like, okay, we gave you your film about a trans woman, and we exalted it to the highest power. It's just like, okay, great, keep that energy, but also like make sure it's good though.
Yeah, no, like the cool thing is like that. But that's what I mean, because even the film is not that well made, but they'll be like, we're disregarding. They're like. And I think that's something that's been bugging me with the films that's been nominated this year, is like using, again, I think Amelia Perez and Wicked sit in the same pocket, where both films are not really well-made films. Like the cinematography in Wicked is horrendous, I don't think it's not a well-made, but they're like, not only are we giving you guys a musical, again, films that don't I think the last musical to get nominated was La La Land. But that was an original story. But even then, they'll be like, here, not only are we giving you a musical, we're giving you one with a Black woman. So they'll be like, and when you look at it, like Cynthia Erivo is the only Black woman nominated in a lead role for the Oscars this year. Coleman Domingo we have for Sing Sing. They'll be like, we'll give you the Black lead for Sing Sing, but we're not going to give you a nomination for the Black co-lead. We're not going to give you for the best supporting actor for Sing Sing, because I believe that actor, he was phenomenal. The actor in Sing Sing, he was phenomenal. They'll be like, we'll give you that, but we're not going to give you for everything else. They'll be like, here's these crumbs. But I fear in the future we're not even going to get the crumbs.
These crumbs are a lot more than we were getting before, and I think about, if we're just talking about black folks, almost every year we get something. Of course, we had Oscars for white when we got nothing, but I think that, when we talk about other cultures that exist here in America that are not white, they don't ever get anything. They can go 20 years without one nomination. And so
Yeah.
I kind of think about them a lot when we talk about, like, oh, Black folks haven't gotten, and, we're still marginalized. But then I think about other people, like
Mhm.
Indigenous people. The fact that Lily Gladstone, who's half white, who was in a movie through a white lens, through white filmmakers, that showed the Osage County as the Osage tribe. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I have so many issues with that movie.
Oh,
Just
girl,
like,
you and I both.
but I just like think about this sense of, like, Indigenous people were here before all of us, and they still don't have the correct or any representation. I mean, how long has Oscars been going on? They got nothing, and we got Lily Gladstone, who's again half white and was not in a good film. But I mean, she was in a good film, but not a really authentic representation of the tribe in which it bears its name.
Mm. No, and I agree because you have Lily, but then also when you look at it, like Chloe Zhao is so far the only woman of color in the entire Oscars history since its inception in 1927 to win an Oscar for Best Director, And Michelle Yeoh, only first Asian woman to win for Best Lead Actress. And then again, like one of the things that pisses me off about that particular award here is like Stephanie Hsu give an admittedly, I think, better performance than Michelle in the film. But she would have been supporting, but she didn't get nominated. But who got nominated? Jamie Lee Curtis, who had like
She did get nominated, Stephanie Chu.
I mean, sorry, no, not nominated. I mean, didn't win, but she lost out to Jamie because they were like, we can't give two Asian women the awards that night. That would be crazy.
I mean, I'm sure that's what they were thinking.
That's their
That. Although I
probably.
really, really like Jamie Lee Curtis in that movie. But yeah, I'm sure they didn't want to give two. I mean, Stephanie Hsu was fantastic in that movie. It was very much a draw for me. But like, yeah, they didn't want to get that. That would be too Asian.
That would have been. We can't give two people of color the top awards in this category for the same night. How dare we? We can't. So like
they also gave Ki Kwan. They gave him an Oscar as well, as they should have.
He was fantastic. I actually think I think he and Stephanie to me stole the film. But my thing is like, and they had to wait decades for that, and then again using like Lily, like that it's a story is because there's been many films about Native Americans and Native American struggles and exploitation and in America. But I think one of the reasons that film got so much accolades was because of who the person was that directed it. Like
good movie, but it's not really authentic to the tribe.
No, right? But like people were like, this is like people were asking it was the best that they could expect from representation. I'm like, the best they could expect from representation is if the film had been made, but is if Martin had let an Osage filmmaker direct the film and like if you know what I mean, like he instead of him putting himself there, he said, you know what, I like you and let you make this film because he had filmmakers as consultants. I'm like, why didn't you just let them make the film?
And you know what? I don't think that film would have been made, and I think that's the reality. I think Martin Scorsese, is very well aware of that, and I think even people within the Osage County have said of course, I'm sure they've been wanting to get the film made the whole time, but they had to have, of course, a white guy do a very super talented white director do it. But I think that is the reality. That is the best that they can do, and I think that's
Yeah, because they're like, if we're gonna give you these stories, we gotta get white people. So we gotta give the award to a white person that's someone involved. Because I was looking at the producers list, for best picture, and when when a film is nominated for best pictures, the producers who are listed and who go up on the stage and get the awards. And I was looking at for Sing Sing. This is one of the very few awards that not Sing Sing, Nickel Boys. Got a nomination for, and all the producers are white. So I was saying, if perchance Nickel Boys was to win that award, who would be going up on the stage and
A whole bunch
accepting
of
the
white
award?
people.
A whole bunch of white people.
A whole bunch of white people, and I don't think we have time to get on my Nickel Boys tirade, but it actually shows that it was produced by a whole bunch of white people. But that's all I will say about that.
Yeah, I like the film, but there's some things that there are some issues that I have with it. But I like the film. I like what he was doing. But like just even thinking about that, like again, we get these crumbs, but we get these crumbs with and in order to get the crumbs, white people still gotta be somehow, given a chance to shine. Like but we'll wrap up soon. But the thing that one of the like what this whole conversation is about, I think, is about how Hollywood is changing and how I think so much is like I just have this very foreboding feeling about where Hollywood is going to go, and Hollywood has such a massive presence in our cultural footprint and in our cultural, psyche. Like so much of what when we think about films, we relate to Hollywood. You know, so much of what we think about celebrity is influenced by Hollywood. So much of what we think about representation is influenced by Hollywood. And whether a lot of people realize it or not, a lot of our politics is influenced by Hollywood, you know? And when I'm thinking about looking at the films that were nominated this year and the films that weren't nominated this year, looking at actors who were nominated this year versus who weren't nominated this year. Like how films like we mentioned that at the top, but like that film A Complete Unknown where Timothy Chalamet plays Bob Dylan, where in the promotion of the film it was more about him than about the story. Where there used to be a term, I haven't heard the term in years, where they say like this film is a vehicle to like create this like a star turning performance for an actor, whereas now I feel like it's the actor is the actor is the vehicle for the film, for the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so perplexed about A Complete Unknown because it's a complete disaster. That film, like it's actually astonishingly bad. I'm shocked that it's gone this far, and the fact that what always worries me is like being like in conversations, and I'm an awards voter. I'm not an Oscar award, like I'm not on the Academy or anything, but I've voted in a number of smaller awards. And you're part of these conversations, just like, what are you guys seeing? And you're being kind of like in the minority in a lot of these conversations, and where I do have to ask, are you being influenced by the publicity run, or do you actually think that this is a good movie and good performances throughout? It's neither of those things. And I think the more lingering thing that I kept on thinking of, trying to make sense of what this movie is and what it's trying to do, is I'm like, is Bob Dylan coming out with a new album or something? Or people like I don't understand so many elements of it. And it's almost like there's not enough journalists who are challenging the press narrative. I'm sorry, there's not enough journalists who are challenging the publicity narrative. Publicists have their own objective, and it's always going to be in favor of their talent. And that I completely understand. That's their function. But journalists are supposed to challenge that at every turn. and I just don't see a lot of that. What I see more of is them corroborating the publicity run, where it's just like, yeah, the publicist said this is like a transformative performance. So obviously it is a transformative. Like so much of it just reads like a press release, and a lot of reviews and conversations I've read about the film, where I'm just like, you guys sound like publicists. Mm-hmm. and or like big fans of Bob Dylan, which is fine. I think that's probably the biggest appeal, is just to hear his songs, even though they're played by somebody who's not a musician. Let's be really clear about that. He's an actor playing a musician. I don't think that people really recognize the distinction there. Um, I I remain dumbfounded by how this film has risen to this level, and the way in which I I think I might have read one or two actually critical reviews of the film. Otherwise, it's been really like flattering, and like, you know, when it comes to, to your point about celebrity, where it's just like, I think that Timothy Chalamet, who I think is a really good actor, by the way, I don't think he's good here. I don't think that there's space for him to be good here. There's so much. What I see is an actor who is imitating someone, not becoming anyone.
Mm.
And it's weird, because I'm just like, some people who I respect have written about this movie. I'm just like, I know you know the distinction between like performance and imitation. This is imitation, and it's like kind of cringy. Um, and I don't even know if he's at fault, if Timothy Chalamet is at fault, the director's at fault. I want to say the director, maybe. Um, I'm I'm so frustrated by the way people have exalted this movie, and the way people are not challenging the publicity narrative, in terms of like, oh, I'm just like, you're not thinking about like how this is probably a way to um, introduce Bob Dylan to younger audiences by way of an imitation, or through Timothy Chalamet, where it's just like, I couldn't really discern between Timothy Chalamet's performance and Timothy Chalamet, and I mean that in not a flattering way. In
No,
this
I know what you mean is that you can't, but who you're seeing is Timothy Chalamet. You're not seeing the performer. You're not seeing the person he's supposed to be.
Not
I get what you mean. Like you're not able to like get fully immersed in the film, because it's just like, I'm just seeing you.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
really is. And you were talking earlier about like the sense of how people are even getting cast, and I think Maya Hawke did an interview where she talked about how like movies are getting made in part by just how many followers people have on social media. Like, this is so unserious. None of this is serious. It's very like, okay, well, talent is very much not part of the conversation. So what are we just talking about? We're just talking about people who have massive amount of followers. But like, social media followers is not always indicative of talent or quality or anything.
Or
It's
ticket
just,
sales.
no, certainly. It's really, it's all problematic. And it's just like, on one hand, I'm like, I don't think that anybody else could have played Bob Dylan. I just don't think that anybody probably should have played Bob Dylan in this movie, because this is not a good movie. It's not even a full story. It's not even a full movie. Like, it does, like, I'm just like, I remember it being 2.5 hours, and like leaving like, oh my God, I don't think I have cared less about a movie all year. And like, it's so silly, and I was hoping we would collectively forget about it. But
Mm. But and I agree with you. I haven't seen that film, but I read your review, and I read another review by a woman who and she I heard, but her review focused on like the female characters, on how there's oh my gosh, forgive me if I don't remember his name, but she was the wife of Paul Seeger. Right. So in the review, the writer was actually give background info on that character. And believe it or not, she's actually the more second interesting person in that film. And she has basically no dialogue or any character in the film. Because who that woman was, she was actually the director of a music TV station back then, like she was the person who gave Bob Dylan his opportunity to perform on screen for the first time. She was the director of the program, and she was a producer. And she was also apparently also very active in the in in politics at that time, and in advocacy and in things. So the writer was like, "Isn't it amazing that you got this woman standing right here next to you, and she's one of the first groundbreaking, one of the first female Asian network producers in America, and she has basically no lines in the film.
Yeah,
not even
she doesn't. I never really quite understood her whole purpose. It's such a I love Bob Dylan, so I want to get this actor who everyone else seems to like for an entirely different reason to play this guy who I really like, and so we can all listen to his songs, so we can remember how great he is. The end. It's giving that energy, and so I'm just going to build these characters who are kind of around Bob Dylan's story without actually, yeah, you're not actually building the characters. You're just kind of planting the characters in the story without actually building them. And so, yeah, Toshi Seeger is her name.
You're right. I was just looking up for her name. Yeah, Toshi Seeger, and and the writer was like, she's lit. She was like, that's what a film should be made about, not Bob Dylan, because we already have like other films about Bob Dylan. She's like, that's who the film should have been about,
Yeah.
And then again, another film that I think that is based, like we talked about it earlier, is Wicked, and like Wicked to me it just feels very much like a using is just basically a vehicle for Ariana to get her film her she's a TV star because she was a Disney TV actress, like she began on Disney TV, then she transitioned to music completely. But the way how the film is promoted is more about her and Cynthia as celebrities more than them as performers, rather than talking about their role in the film. A lot of their and again, it's about pandering to the audience, and it's about pandering to particular fan bases. It's not about it's not about trying to attract more audiences, more of a general audience, to say, like, here, for people who aren't really into musicals, this film would make you be interested in watching musicals. It's not about saying, for just general film fans, like, this film is a great film. It's very much about, here, Ariana's fans, focus on this. Because why? Because they think that likes on a post, likes on a trailer equals ticket sales, equals ticket numbers.
Well, I think in this case that's true.
But how much did
it made $1 bajillion? It made so much.
It made a lot of money. But then when it comes to actually critiquing the film, like, I just liked it fine. It would, like, for me, one of my biggest problems in the film is Ariana's diction actually is terrible in the film. Like, her diction as a singer is terrible. But the other reason I mentioned that is, like, in the way how you talk about when you watch a Complete Unknown, you can't not see Timothy. When you're watching Wicked, you can't not see Ariana. I got completely invested in the character of Elphaba because I think one of Cynthia's strongest suits as an actress is that she knows how to just inhabit her characters. She just knows how to just completely be immersed in this character that she's playing. As for me, I didn't see Ariana doing that. I didn't see Ariana being Linda. I actually saw Ariana doing an imitation of Kristen Chenoweth playing Linda. Because if you watch how Kristen Chenoweth plays Linda, Ariana is playing her for beat exactly the same way. And I'm like, if this is going to be the expectation for a lot of young actresses and actors going forward, that's also going to be a problem with regards to the art in film itself. Acting should be about inhabiting the character. I should not be, you know what I mean? I should be completely immersed in. That's what performance is. But if the expectation and the limits are just going to be, as long as you get cast, that's all that's required of you.
I mean, I thought Wicked was really entertaining. I don't think it should be 2 movies. And I think the marketing was bananas, and I have a lot of complicated thoughts around the way it was marketed as opposed to how other movies that are far superior were marketed. But
their promotion began like a whole year and a half before, didn't it?
It's still going. It is still happening. So it's exhaustive and also indicative of way in which other films are just not like the way in which they prioritize remakes, which is what this is, and versus like original storytelling, which is getting further and further marginalized until it's completely off the slate altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I was entertained by Wicked. I don't think it should be two movies. I thought this movie was too long. I have not seen the Wicked Broadway show, although I've always wanted to. But all this to say, I thought both Cynthia Erivo, I thought all the performances were actually fine. But again, I really think that this was nominated so many times so that the Academy can secure enough ratings from very critical audience of people who are very active on social media, and that is like all of Wicked's audience. And so that's I really think is that you're grabbing like the Wicked fan base, you're grabbing the Disney fan base, you're grabbing the pop star fan base, it's
Timothy
like
Chalamet fan base.
yes, that's all. It's very transparent, and I don't know why people don't see that. Like, it's very obvious.
But the thing is like even if they do see it, they don't want to admit it, because that's another thing where I feel we're getting this where before I mentioned like the studios and the industry itself is like becoming less concerned about art, about film as an art, and like they have always seen film as a commodity. It's a product, but like for instance, I feel like things are just becoming so much more shallow now. You know what I mean? Like
they would like us to think that for sure. I mean, other
yeah,
stuff is happening, but yeah.
yeah, but I feel like I feel like we're just like, for instance, using a complete unknown and Wicked as examples. Much of the discussion with regards to just like in general, on social media, and even in like coverage that I've seen for them, very few of it has to actually do with the artistic side of the films and the stories. It doesn't really have to do with the actual art of making the film. It's just more about highlighting the celebrity of the actors. It's about making filmmakers celebrities. It's about making it's about, you know what I mean? It's not really about the art itself. And I'm seeing it become like where people be like, oh, like I get how off them, just like let people like things. And I'm like, first of all, my job is as a critic is to critique. And my job is to look beyond just the surface and like try to break it down. My job is to say the art is because I see critiquing film there, because I see critique and criticizing as two different things. But I see like what we do is to the fact that we take so much time and effort into paying attention to the details, into saying that I wish this performer had actually immersed themselves in the character more, into saying that I wish the filmmaker had done more research, and actually show that he cares about the culture and the people. I wish a filmmaker wouldn't use AI in this way. And I think a lot of like everything like we've been talking about is because for people like us, and like there's so many people in the industry that do what we do, is because we love the film. We love film, we love the art of film, we love the craft of film. And when you have like you have fans, and you have like even filmmakers saying, why you critique the film and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, because we love it, we want it to be better.
People don't understand what criticism is, and people are less and less used to criticism because everyone thinks that we're all living in a fandom and we're all just fans in some really blanket and one-dimensional way that has nothing to do with art. It's just more to do with just obsession of people who we don't even know, strangers that we see on our TV screens. And so I think it's more about that people having a really strong reaction to anything that goes against their whole personality, which they have tied to a person who they've never met, or their whole personality, which they've tied to a film that they did not even make themselves. And so it's just like, it's all very ridiculous, I think is the word I keep going back to. But yeah, it is, we do it because we want to, because we actually we like movies and movie
Mhm.
making, but also because for me, I just want people to think more honestly and critically about what they're ingesting and how.
Yeah, no, and it's true, and it's just like I just fear that that is so much that's going away more and more with the studios and the even the performers and the directors and everyone just being like, let's take this thing as it is and like not critique it, and like that will have, I think, to me, detrimental effects on the industry, but also on our culture and our society. Like as we've been talking, like so many things are changing and not necessarily for the better. Like that, just the fact that people are saying, just let people like things is just one aspect of that.
Well, we're in an anti-intellectual culture, which is how I'm using my friend's term because it's so fantastic. I was just like, oh, that's exactly where we are.
It is. It's
We're, we're living in this culture that does not actually want to be challenged by anything, despite the fact that we are all deeply flawed people who are deeply contradictory on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's anti-intellectual and I keep saying it's lack of curiosity, but there's another word, but I keep saying is uncurious or is it incurious? Is
It's
uncurious?
incurious. It's incurious. It's deeply, problematically, awfully incurious.
Right. That's the thing. So those are the two where I've been using those two words too, like in anti and we're moving towards especially here in North America, because I am seeing it here in Canada too, as being increasingly anti-intellectual and incurious. People aren't curious about things anymore, whether it's about film, whether it's about the world they live in, the art they take in, the people they live next to, the people they interact to. There's no curiosity. And I'm like, what are human beings without curiosity? Like we've got as far as we've gotten because of curiosity. When someone's saying, like using like from Dexter's Laboratory, like being like Dini say, what does this button do? Like we've got it as far as we have, where somebody says, what is this light reflecting off of this thing? What is this thing called? You get the invention of mirrors. You get the invention of the cat of film, because someone looked at a mirror and says, I wonder if I can manipulate the way that light moves and shifts and find a way to like project it. Like, we wouldn't have film without curiosity. We wouldn't have film without people trying to think more and advance themselves, and I'm like, if we're regressing so much, I'm like, what are we gonna do? Eventually go back to the times of being amoebas? Like, what is happening?
Yes, that would be the operative. I am sure that's many people's operative. Like, let's just all just shrivel up and like be in our own cocoons and like not learn anything and not have any actual like productive conversations with one another, because we also are deeply socially awkward, so we don't even know how to actually have a adult conversation that's difficult. It's really concerning. It's all concerning.
And it is, and like for people like me, for me, because sometimes I have problems at explaining myself or things the way I understand the world, and I'll use films as a reference to help people understand something. I'm like, okay, I'm like, okay, you think about this scene. I'm like, you remember this, and I'm like, that's how I use it. Use film to explain things to people, and it works. And I'm like, if there is no films like that, and I'm not saying that they're not, because there's so many filmmakers that are making amazing independent
Yeah.
films and small films, but like is becoming increasingly hard for them just to get funding to make their small films and their things, and like where
Yeah.
are they gonna put them? Platforms. We haven't even talked about digital platforms and stuff. Maybe I have to do another podcast about that. But like the way digital platforms are moving too, like where are they gonna go?
Mm-hmm. I mean, good journalism is happening all the time and good art is happening all the time. The issue is that not enough people are supporting either of those things. Because I see it all the time. I see good art all the time. I see
Mhm.
good journalism all the time. People are not interested. People are more interested in just like like reinforcing their own trivial thoughts or opinions, or like too few people are interested in actually gaining information to actually be challenging their own perspectives, something that they can actually learn. And and also like art that is extremely complex. There's so many that are just like so good. Like, again, I was saying soundtrack to a coup d'etat, which it really tries your patience. And when I say that, I mean that it is not an easy film. And I went in with no knowledge of anything and got so much out of it. And I think it was overwhelming for me because I knew nothing. And so I was getting so much information um, from like years ago. And so, but I just don't think enough people are particularly curious about anything that they don't already know, but they don't know so much, you know?
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. That was one I wanted to see because I know it premiered at, I believe, Sundance, and I wasn't able to get it at Sundance, and I wasn't able to get
Yeah.
screeners for that. And like other films. And the funny thing is, like, we talked a lot about feature films, but like even in like the short film category, like the short film category has like some amazing films, like the Cypress, it's a film made by some two Iraq filmmakers, and it's a stunning animated film, like so different, you know. And then there's short films, feature live action films like The Man Who Would Not Remain Silent, you know, and animated films like Wild Robot, you know. But like there is all of these amazing films, but they're also the ones not getting highlighted in the trades, you know, and like that kind of stuff. And like I just fear for this industry. I fear for for our work, for our ability to be able to do our work. But just one of the reasons I wanted us to have this discussion is just to like talk about that, you know, about where where we see the industry going and what's happening, and how, because I always say films are a reflection of the society we live in, and like the Oscars is a reflection of where the industry is and where the industry is going. And I'm not seeing a pretty picture, but yeah. But thank you so much, Candice, for taking the time for chatting with me today. We had a rough start because the Zoom wanted to mess me up, but I said not today, Zoom. I we got it done. But thank you so much, Candice, for taking the time for chatting with me.
Thank you. Yeah, this was really good.
No, it was. I appreciate it because it made me think of like what was it? Not immediate parents. What's that? Because again, one of the reasons I like chatting with you is that even though sometimes we may not always agree on everything, but just the way your perspective helps me to think, you know, I can't like, you know, just like think of another perspective and like think, you know what, Carolyn, your way is not always right. You know, your way is not the only way. And that's one of the reasons I like chatting with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, I something I think about all the time is art. Art was never meant to be like it was always meant for people to engage about and really have like deeper discussions about it. It wasn't meant to be like everybody's a hive mind and everybody thinks the exact same way about it. It is impossible to approach art in the exact same way and come away with
Mm-hmm,
anything.
mm-hmm.
People only want to hear what they already believe and what they already feel about something, and it's really impossible, and it makes it extremely difficult to have conversations that that are worthy, because just like either everyone's in agreement or everyone's like scared to disagree and stuff like that. I'm just like, this is part of adulthood. Like, and this is part of like like honestly engaging with work, with art. That's it was not ever meant to be like this hive mind fandom hollow celebrity you know nothingness, which is what it's become.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's just like is like we mentioned the anti-intellectualism and in curiosity, and that a lot of that has to do with that, you know, like film is stories are, I think, supposed to make people curious, you know, like I say if I watch a film and especially and someone makes like a reference to like something with regards to like science or art or history or whatever, I'll go look it up. I'll be like, I didn't know about this thing, like, and you know, and I'll go look it up because I think film is should be a learning medium, you know, like a medium to help us, even if it's, and it doesn't even have to be any super deep film or whatever. It can be just like a film about pop culture or whatever. But even then, you should be curious about going to learn about the pop culture that is being referenced in the film, you know. Like because of a complete unknown, I learned about that lady, and I was just like, oh, I would have never known that if not for me reading the review that the lady wrote about the film, and that's how it should be. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, that's what our job is supposed to be. And like, don't mind the industry might be trying to make it more difficult for us to do it. We're still doing it.
The other thing I will say before, and I will stop talking, but the other part of a complete unknown that really bothered me is that it did not talk. It was completely apolitical, and I'm like, how do you talk about Bob Dylan? How do you represent Bob Dylan and strip him of any type of his in part, especially in this point of his life where the film focuses on his like apoliticism, but also he was political in other ways, and just like the way in which like part of what bothered what created so much tension between him and Joan Baez is because she was very political and he did not. She felt that he did not stand up enough for things. So all these things, I don't know. I'm just like, can we really talk about this film in an honest way? Because what I'm seeing, I'm very deeply like disappointed and really bored.
And for me, there's nothing worse than a film being boring.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Candice. This was great. It was great to talk to you.
Yes, thank you.